Hi there, my name is Kylie, and if I had a nickel for every time that I saw a branch climb up into a girl's pussy, then I would have 2 nickels. Which isn't that many nickels, but it's weird that it happened twice, right? Hello, and welcome to the video, or welcome to the channel if you're new here. I hope that everyone's ready to get groovy. I know that reference isn't from either movie we're gonna talk about today, but it's still relevant. If you're new here, let me let you in on a little secret. This is classified haunted hippie subscriber knowledge. I do these original versus remake videos on my channel, have been doing it for about the past 6 months now, and I have found the perfect formula, the creme de la creme of video essay structures. So first we're gonna go through all the box office numbers, the behind the scenes information, the historical genre relevance. Next, I'll walk you through a brief plot breakdown of either movie, and we'll discuss all of the relevant differences the remake made. Then we'll compare our characters, their arcs, their personalities, their icon status maybe. After that, we're talking style, so we'll be comparing the cinematography and a fan favorite, all of the practical effects in either movie. Lots of guts and gore to get into today. And finally, we'll talk about all the thematics in each movie. What was I supposed to walk away with? How was I supposed to feel? What was I supposed to learn? And for the little cherry on top, I will try to decide which is the superior film. That's where we're gonna switch things up just a little bit, because I did post something on my community tab and I asked for your opinions, so I will include those in that portion of the video. A little disclaimer right before we jump in. Most unfortunately, I don't really like either of these movies. This hasn't happened before, I don't think, when I've done these comparison videos, because I usually love at least one of the movies, if not both of the ones that I'm covering. But I just want to clarify that just because I don't like something doesn't mean that I can't recognize it as a good movie or that I can't respect it for what it did for the genre. So for the most part, I don't think that any of my biases will be creeping into this essay, but I just thought it was fair that you should know that those biases are there. It's only ethical, babes. So let's get things rolling with The Evil Dead from 1981. It was directed by Sam Raimi with a budget of roughly $350,000. Sources have very different numbers for the worldwide box office, so we don't know if this movie made about $2.4 million or about $29 million. That's a huge range, and quite honestly, I don't know how to find the real box office numbers. It didn't take off right away. It is what's known as a sleeper hit, although when it was released, the critical response was generally really positive. The editor of Fangoria at the time called this movie the exception to low-budget horror. The LA Times also called it an instant classic. Stephen King has also cited it as one of his favorite horror movies of all time, which is what brought on the interest of New Line Cinema and why they acquired the distribution rights. And as you probably well know, this movie spawned 2 sequels, a remake, a 3-season TV show, like 5 video games, and maybe more. I mean, like action figures, the whole thing. So it's safe to say it has definitely made its mark in horror history. Now for some behind the scenes fun. Oh. My research for the original included watching the movie with commentary from directors Sam Raimi and producers/actor Bruce Campbell and Robert Tappert. I also found a documentary here on YouTube that's just called The Evil Dead, The Untold Saga. So back in college, as a student of Michigan State University, Sam Raimi used to rent out their auditorium to show his old Super 8 movies that he made in high school. So this man was just destined to be a filmmaker since he was like a child, and he was ready right out of the gate, right out of college at 21. That's how old he was when they were making The Evil Dead. I'm turning 23 in 5 months, so that's a little bit upsetting. To be fair, I did make a ton of videos on iMovie as a child, so who's the real prodigy? I had this technique where I could make it look like I was flying, so come on, I'll show you. It looked a little something like this. Sam Raimi could never. Also, you guys, the raw footage of that. Sorry, we're veering too far off topic, reeling it back in. So getting more into the behind the scenes, this movie easily could make the series that Possessed by Horror is doing, where she covers toxic horror movie sets. The amount of injuries from the Evil Dead set, the amount of discomfort all these people went through, it's mind-blowing, and I don't know why I didn't expect this, given how low budget the movie looks and the location where they shot. It's just always surprising to me how traumatic heck it was to make so many classic films. I'm gonna share just a few stories, but bear in mind that almost everybody who worked on The Evil Dead ended up with some sort of scar or injury. So before they found the cabin of their dreams, they went through the ringer during location scouting. The most awkward story in my opinion being that they went to this old 1920s resort and they looked at the cabins there. However, whenever they were taken into the cabins, they were just full of squatters who were obviously not too happy to be seeing a film crew there. Needless to say, they didn't go with that location, but when they did find the cabin of their dreams, it was grueling work to make it even halfway presentable. They had to plaster and paint pretty much all of the walls, and they had to scrape poop off of the floor. Poop! I don't know if it was human or animal or what, like, I don't know. Also, at some point early on during production, someone broke into the cabin and stole a bunch of power tools. Little did they know that those tools were sitting next to some equipment that cost thousands more dollars. So luckily they didn't take the equipment because they probably didn't have any use for it and didn't understand the value. But that meant that from that point forward, somebody had to sleep in the cabin at all times when they weren't working there and they had to rotate. Which, scary. I get why they rotated so, you know, multiple people wouldn't have to be sleeping on the hard floor, but I could never sleep in a cabin like that by myself. No. Bruce Campbell even said that he developed a Vietnam-like complex when he went back home after they wrapped. He slept on the floor of his bedroom right next to his very comfortable bed for 2 months after they wrapped. And he also started to grow out a beard, which apparently just confused the hell out of his mom. Our leading lad, Bruce Campbell, also got a very nasty infection while working on that set that he still has a scar from. You probably all well know this scene where his ankle gets all ripped up and he had to wear latex for long hours of the day, which led to him getting an infected ingrown hair, which subsequently got so infected that it turned black and it started oozing. But he just didn't get medical treatment, or at least not while he was filming, I'm not sure, but he said that there is still an indent in his leg from where the infection was. So he's just a real trooper, and also apparently a pleasure to work with. According to Sam Raimi, he was able to almost always perfectly duplicate however he delivered any given line, or any given performance. This was also a very physical role, which if you don't understand the importance of that, it makes it so much easier for continuity with editing, so the editor will just have a lot more options. Ellen Sandwise also said that he was very serious but very sweet on set, and she did have a little crush on him at the time, which is cute, but also get in line. She went through hell as well, and I want you to listen to her talking about the forest scene, we'll call it.
Let's get it all out in the open. I was 20 years old. Let's just start with that. I was very gung-ho to make this film. I wanted to do what the director told me. I didn't really think anybody was ever going to see this movie. You know, big surprise now, but I did have concerns that I talked about with Sam. He somehow convinced me there's going to be a lot of fog, you're not going to really see anything, you know, don't worry about it. So I'm going, okay, fine. We did that scene, exhaustion doesn't even describe. I was running in my nightgown, it was 40 or less degrees. I was running through woods, you know, just brambles, and there was no paths or anything. That final... really, I had no idea they were going to do that. I mean, obviously, I knew that the legs were going to spread open and that the vines were going to crawl up, but that final with the stick was all post-production. I had no idea until I saw it, and I went, and of course at the premiere, you know, with my mother there, and that was fun.
This is a good lesson in consent. It's important to know that if you want to shove anything up someone's pussy, you need enthusiastic permission to do so. So working on set was pretty horrific, but the horrors didn't even end after they wrapped filming. Because after the movie's release, Sam Raimi had to go to court in the UK because he was brought up on an obscenity charge. The movie was so grotesque at the time that he was charged for it. Like, that's insane. There were even more horror stories from set and everything, but we'll get into that more when we talk about the practical effects, so stay tuned. Speaking of practical effects, which 2013 movie that uses little to no CGI and is one of the goriest movies ever made? This guy, Evil Dead from 2013, let's talk about it. This movie was directed by Fede Alvarez, who we also recently talked about during my Texas Chainsaw Massacre review, but this movie had a budget of $17 million and went on to make $97.5 million in the box office. There's a ton of behind the scenes stuff that I found for this one. I found a vlog of Jane Levy going through one of her days on set. There was an interview with producer Bruce Campbell, along with plenty of other interview featurettes. There's also a ton of B-roll from behind the scenes that's all just available to watch on YouTube. But first and foremost, it seems like we really have to thank Fede Alvarez for this movie even existing at all. Sam Raimi was actually one of the people who was most excited to do a remake, and the person who was least excited was surprisingly Bruce Campbell. But Fede Alvarez presented his ideas to them, and that pretty much immediately changed all of their minds. Then they became super excited about basically making the same movie they made in 1981, just with a higher budget and better technology. Even with a bigger budget though, this movie was hell on earth to make, as made evident by Jane Levy's vlogs. That girl was in the trenches. She mentioned that there was usually about 5 steps to applying all of the fake blood on her, specifically for the blood rain scene. She also usually had to come to set about 3 hours early to get makeup applied for Evil Mia. And through the course of filming, she really emotionally exhausted herself. She said that she learned a lot about her own limits and her own abilities. She was often freezing cold and wet while shooting this movie, so you could imagine there's a lot of method acting coming through. Here's a brief moment that was captured after several takes running endlessly through the forest.
But I couldn't see anything, but again, it works. Mia wouldn't be able to see anything.
All right. Thank you.
And this is another moment that I want to show you because it just exhibits the level of exhaustion this girl was experiencing.
It was the middle of the night and it was so cold and it was so intense to be going through that, like all night long being soaking wet in the blood rain, and a take would end and I couldn't remember it. I don't know exactly what that means. Or like I watched playback of one of the shots and it was like 20 seconds longer than I remember it being. Like either I was extremely present or I wasn't present at all.
And my last note on Jane, but certainly not least, she also agreed to be buried alive to help the performance of a fellow cast member. I'm committed to this craft, but you would have to fucking sedate me to bury me alive. And if you're not aware of how long it takes to get coverage, that girl was in the earth for at least an hour, minimum. And that's a very generous assumption, I think. But to be fair, she was very committed to this movie, and I don't think she has any regrets. She also said that Fede Alvarez fostered a really great creative environment on set, and that they found a lot of greatness in the moment. She also mentioned something about that I found really interesting. She said that you can't try to be funny or scary, it has to kind of happen organically. That's why a lot of what made the final cut was actually improvised in the moment on set. A good example of a comedy movie that's almost entirely improvised is Best in Show. Watched that for the first time recently, it's hilarious. And an immaculate example of a horror movie that's almost entirely improvised is The Blair Witch Project, one of my all-time favorites. Also, Jane Levy's vlogging style, like she was vlogging before this was a trend.
Eric, that's Lou Taylor Pucci's face. I think that's Lou Taylor Pucci's chest. Who are you? No idea. Oh, well, good to go. Gotta go. Who's this green person? Okay, there's a couple faces that I don't know who they are.
David Dobrik who? Or no, let's actually never mention his name again. Now we have a lot of behind the scenes info for this one that again might have to wait until later, but all in due time, babes. This video is gonna be long enough as it is, so let's just get into the plots. In the original The Evil Dead, Ash and friends head out to a remote cabin in the woods for some relaxing vacation time, but they accidentally stumble upon the Book of the Dead. After the incantations are spoken and the evil finds the unsuspecting young adults, Ash must fight his way out, unfortunately having to kill his best friends and girlfriend along the way. In Evil Dead from 2013, 5 friends set out to a remote cabin in the woods to help Mia overcome her addiction. They find the Book of the Dead, and while studying it, Eric utters the incantations within. What starts out as seemingly just withdrawal symptoms soon escalates and spreads to every member on the trip until Mia's final blood-soaked battle with the evil. Something to note real quick right before we get into the plot, just real quick. Do the incantations in the Book of the Dead from the remake look just a wee bit familiar? Come through Bye Bye Man inspiration. Oh my god. If you have not seen this movie, this is from the Bye Bye Man from 2017. It is so horrific. It's a terrible movie. And I don't know why, but it is so comforting to me. I've probably watched it at least 4 times since it came out, but that is besides the point, babes. But getting back to the Evil Dead, so the plots of these movies are pretty much the same, but they did include a few few new subplots in the remake. The obvious main difference is the addiction subplot to this movie. It's the reason why all these young adults ended up at this cabin in the first place, which I actually feel like strengthened the story because it made more sense why these people were not willing to leave until it was too late. It's the type of frustration that's good because with a lot of horror movies, you want to yell at the characters to like get out of there. So the same thing happened in Evil Dead. However, you also sympathized with them and you understood why they were not making better decisions. Something that I did not prefer though, plot-wise, that I wanted to point out was the beginning of Evil Dead 2013. We get this prelude where a guy has to burn his daughter alive and there's like a cult there. It's all a bit confusing, but I think it's meant to explain why the Book of the Dead ended up in their cabin. But I think it just raises more questions than it answers because like, where did these people come from? Where did they go? Where did you come from, Cotton Eye Joe? Why did they have to break into this cabin to perform their ritual? Or was this cabin originally theirs and then Mia's mother bought it? And if that's the case, why is there dialogue about how, oh, mom would have hated to see it this way? Like, why would there be such an emotional attachment if it didn't always belong to their family? I personally just would have cut that opening scene, like just start the movie where the story begins. I hate that about Jennifer's Body too, where they start the movie with the end of the movie, and it's like, just trust that your story is good enough that I'll be engaged and I'll want to watch the whole thing without you flip-flopping things around. To be fair, there are a lot of horror movies where this works because the opening scene is connected to later events of the movie. Jaws is one, Valentine, Us, Get Out, but with this movie, with Evil Dead, I just didn't feel like there were enough connecting dots that it really made sense to leave it in. But back to the positives, there's also this brother and sister dynamic that's written in with some of their history, and I think that it kind of fuels their development, their arcs really well. Their mother got sick and Mia's brother David kind of left her on her own to take care of their dying mom. And then it seems like that is what ultimately fueled her addictions, and so now David is trying to make up for that by being there for her now. And in the climax of the movie, he does end up sacrificing himself for her, which I do think provides really poetic closure. The original doesn't really have that much of a plot. It's just a lot of chaos and cackling. And Bruce Campbell being a baddie. So really not much to say for the plot of the original. Let's just jump into the character comparisons. I'm not going to linger here either because we don't have too many people to discuss. In the original, of course, we have Ash Williams, who then went on to carry the entire franchise on his back. A strong lead, one of horror's few shining final boys. But we don't get to know him all that well because of all of the chaos that he endures. In the remake, we do get to know some of the characters a little bit better, but it's not that consequential. Like, you just get a sense of their character and what purpose they fulfill. Like, for example, there is the nurse and she's just there to take care of Mia. You get the nerdy, curious boy and he just serves the function of opening the curse. You also have the absolutely useless girlfriend of David who disappears for majority of the movie until she shows back up and cuts off her own arm. You have David the brother, but we kind of already discussed his character arc. He kind of seems like the typical guy that always wants to do the right thing, but he just is not always able to. And then we have our most dynamic character of Mia. In contrast to Ash, we have an insanely well-rounded character. We learn about her past trauma, her addictions, the rift that has caused in her familial relationships. She also fights just as hard as Ash, losing a hand in the process and wielding a chainsaw with one arm. Bruce Campbell even seems to be a big fan of her.
She's taking this movie, by the shoulders and she's screaming at it in the face. She's taking this movie over. If people want to call her the new Ash, I say do it. She's earned it.
Full agree. I think that she meets the standard, if not exceeding it, because she had to go through way more than Ash Williams did. At least just in the original Evil Dead. I know that there's sequels with Ash. I'm not gonna get into that right now. These movies are definitely less character driven and more practical effects driven. So with that being said, I think we should dive into our style comparison. With the original, let's start with the cinematography because they made some pretty groundbreaking choices for the time. The most notable probably being the evil spirit that's flying around through the woods, which is yet again reminiscent of Black Christmas and Halloween. But this one is unique because it's the POV of a spirit, not of a killer. Although, for this reason, oddly enough, one of Sam Raimi's professors, like one of his film school professors, was really disappointed in the movie. After a screening of this movie, Sam Raimi was kind of confronted by his professor, who was like, "You can't just do crazy shot after crazy shot. I felt like I was going insane watching your movie." And babes, doesn't that mean that the movie was doing its job? I have to stop slipping into the British accent. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. They recreated the cinematography style in the remake, and the behind the scenes on this are so cool. They literally put the cameraman on a zip line for the shots where the evil spirit was chasing Mia around the forest. And she said that if she didn't time things just right while she was running, she would have been bodied by the camera. A lot of the cinematography of the remake is really cool. You can tell that there is definitely an artistic flair to it. But the biggest style choice that we have to talk about with the original is the use of the practical effects on the possessed friends. Sorry, my biases are gonna slip in here because I'm just not really a fan of the makeup in this movie. A lot of the times it looks like someone literally just took a Crayola marker and drew on the actors' faces. But I am a fan of those possessed white eyes, and boy do I have a story to tell you about those. They had to have those hard lenses fitted onto each actor by an ophthalmologist, which apparently was pretty painful for them, like getting them fitted and stuff. And they were given very specific rules. You can only put them in up to 5 times a day, and you can only wear them for 15 minutes at a time. Here's the kicker though. That's a little bit tough to comply with when you're making a movie and you don't have very much time between shots to get all the coverage. Even trickier when the cabin that you're shooting in has no running water, so nobody can wash their hands before they put the lenses into the actor's eyes. Not to mention they have a ton of makeup and latex around their eyes as well, which makes it even harder. So sometimes the actors would just leave them in for way longer than they were supposed to because they're like, oh my god, like just get the shot, then I don't have to put them back in. Apparently one of the actresses also went latex crazy, which is not something that I've heard of before, but fully understand. After spending way too much time in the latex, one of the actresses kind of went nutso and she started ripping it all off of her face, so they had to call it wraps for the day. But like I said, I'm just not really a big fan of the makeup in this movie. It kind of takes me out of it. Even some of the bruising that you see on Bruce Campbell's face and stuff, it just doesn't look that great. But there are a few moments of stop motion animation and other kind of gore effects that I thought looked really good. This hasn't necessarily aged the best, but it looks cool and I respect the hustle. They were originally gonna do that practically, but then they realized that they didn't have the budget or the manpower to reset a melting body if they didn't get it right on the first take. So that's why they went with stop motion. The best practical effects of the movie though are obviously whenever somebody's leg is getting torn up, but I can't really show that here, so let's move on to the effects of the remake. The remake's practical effects made me physically ill. Everything in this movie is just a little bit too realistic almost for my taste. You got vomit, you got burns, you got foam coming out the mouth, there's cutting infected limbs off, there's smashing people's heads, there's chainsawing demons, there's blood rain. They used 50,000 gallons of fake blood in that rain scene alone, and because of that scene, it is apparently the goriest movie ever made. I know this is a lot of horror fans' wet dream, but not mine. There are a lot of things about this movie that I like, and I really respect the realism of the practical effects, but my constant, relentless need to vomit during this movie got a little bit annoying. I kind of felt like some of the effects were a bit overkill because after a while, that was all the movie was to me. It's kind of hard to explain, so I'll compare it to Predator, where for the first 2/3 of the movie, it's basically just giant dudes constantly shooting guns and it's all just noise. So by the point of the movie where everybody is dying and possessed and there is raining blood, I'm like, okay, I'm kind of over it. My own preferences aside, I still think that that choice is so dope. Like, Evil Dead 2013 is the movie that these filmmakers originally wanted to make, and now they finally had the budget to play and do whatever they wanted. And I like how Bruce Campbell phrased it here.
We're using new school effects to make the special effects look like they're from the 70s. The audience, I don't think, will be thrown out by this one. They'll be sucked in like a vortex.
And that's why, even though I'm not that big on this movie, I still have mad respect. Because the gore in this movie is literally god tier. Like, if I was making one of those ranking tier videos, then it would go at the top. So even though the gore is not for me, I still think that it's like the coolest part of the style of this movie. Few things about the style though that I think really hinder it. It used this very early 2010s kind of jump scare editing where the tension builds and then there's some sort of gimmick like a girl gets pulled by her leg really quick and there's a really weird edit on it. That just takes me out of the movie, and as much as I'm a fan of goofy early 2000s, 2010s editing, I think it just didn't service this movie that well. Because tonally this movie was so dark and I don't think that those were meant to be moments of comedy, but they kind of made me chuckle. Another thing is the writing style. The dialogue is so bad. In the scene where everybody is kind of meeting each other for the first time, the screenwriters were like, quick, we gotta let the audience know who the nurse is.
This is my girl, Natalie.
Oh, the heartbreaker from your car shop. The doctor.
Actually, she's...
I'm a registered nurse. Nurse? Right. Sorry.
Yeah, they wrote that, they shot that, and they were like, yup, that'll do. With good exposition, you won't really notice it. Like, just as the movie goes on, you'll become more acquainted with all the characters and their issues. That dialogue could have been fully removed, and then we would still have the scene where she is like putting an IV into Mia, and then from that we could assume, oh, okay, so she's a nurse or a doctor. Doesn't really matter. Going back to the tone though, I would say that that is one of the biggest differences of these movies. I don't know if I was supposed to be laughing at some of the stuff that happened in the original, but I was. Like when Ash tries to give his friend a drink, dead or alive, you're low-key waterboarding him. Like what? The overall tone of the remake is relentlessly harsh. At least that was the intention, because as I mentioned, there are just some parts of this movie that are a little bit corny, but the remake is obviously the more serious of the two. Lastly, in terms of style, I'm not gonna linger on this because Sam Raimi has even expressed regrets about it, but that would be the forest scene. It's just in such poor taste. Like, it's one of the main things that put me off the first time that I watched it, and it made me go, I don't think I like this movie. People seem to neglect the fact that that scene was fully recreated in the remake, and it's just as visceral. The branch is even more slimy, and it almost looks like a giant turd, so it's almost even more upsetting to watch. Hence my intro of this video. I should not have even one nickel, and yet I have two. But it is what it is. Let's just move on to the themes in either movie. Again, we're gonna be keeping it brief in this section because I don't feel like the original was going for too much. There's kind of a Pandora's box vibe where after you open the can of worms, you know, there they are. We're also following young adults who seem very carefree, but also very innocent. They're maybe recent college graduates, or maybe they're even still in college, and maybe it's a metaphor for how relentlessly we are punched in the face by reality once we get out of school. But I happen to be a recent graduate who is probably about the age that these people were in the movie, so that's why I took away what I did from this movie. But I think that the beauty about a movie that doesn't have a super obvious theme is that you can take from it whatever you will. But I would guess that what terrified people the most about The Evil Dead is that these people were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. They just had terrible luck, exhibiting how bad things happen to good people, how death is imminent and it'll come and get you when you're least suspecting. Fun stuff. In the remake, it's also a pretty similar sentiment. I think that they also wanted you to identify with David's character arc, where he kind of went from being a coward to being his sister's hero. Also, if you're fancy, you might correlate the events of the movie to withdrawal symptoms, and you might view the whole movie as kind of an allegory for overcoming addiction. Or maybe that was just kind of the motif they were going for and not necessarily a theme. Whatever it may be, the remake is definitely more emotionally rich, as you have this character of Mia who is both literally and figuratively fighting her demons. Here is where I would normally do my recap and I would try to decide which is the superior film, but I'm doing something a little bit different today because both of these movies I rate at 2 out of 5 stars. I'm just not a fan. I don't really see myself after making this video having a desire to watch these movies ever again. So I'll conclude with my own opinion that I did come to, but I want to start with all of your opinions because I needed a little bit of outside help, like an outside perspective. And this was where you guys came in and you commented under that community tab post, so thank you all who commented. We got a lot of responses, and a lot of them I was so surprised. You guys have so much love for the remake. A couple of you even said that the remake was one of your favorite movies of all time. I got too many to read them all out, but I am going to feature some of them on the screen, so pause if you'd like to read them. I would say that most of the comments that I got, you guys actually prefer the remake, which I was so surprised by, but a lot of people that expressed that they prefer the remake actually love both movies, and for some of you guys, it was to the point where you were just like, nah, don't make me do this. And we got a surprising minority that preferred the original. I guess I shouldn't be too surprised given the very distinct quality difference in either movie, but I just assumed that an 80s classic would reign supreme because there is so much love for that campy schlock back then. But what do I think? It is the overall comparison time. From all of the background info that I obtained, I have an equal mad respect for both of these movies. All those filmmakers, the actors, everybody, they were all in the trenches. So equal respect to either movie. The plots are really similar. The remake just had a more thematically rich story, which made a more engaging plot. As for the characters, I don't really have a preference, though I probably lean a little bit more towards Mia just because, like, as a woman myself, it is amazing to see her being so badass. And she also had to overcome way more than Ash Williams did. As I said, like, not to romanticize addiction or anything, but she was literally and figuratively fighting demons. Style-wise, I think I have to go with the remake just because of the updated effects, of course, and I love a good foggy forest moment. The setting of the remake just really, I love it. And like Bruce Campbell said, the practical effects of the original just had updated technology, but it's pretty much how they would have done it back in '79 if they had the means, which I think is so sick. They should let directors of original classics have like a $20 million higher budget than they did originally and just see what they do. And lastly, I also prefer the themes of the remake because even though the dialogue is not written with a shred of nuance, like at least they're like adequately commenting on the human condition. So all in all, I guess I would say I prefer Evil Dead from 2013. Oh yes, absolutely. It's been a while since I've had a remake win one of these comparison videos, so good for Evil Dead. But that brings us to a close. I of course want to thank all my lovely patrons though before I go. So if you want to sign up for that and support me, that'll be linked down below. But if you're new, I hope you subscribe, click the notification bell so you don't miss my next comparison video. Also give this video a like, it lets me know that I should continue on with my original versus remake era on this channel. Have a good one, stay groovy, and I hope I catch you in the next one. Bye!